Hi, my name is Jeremiah Baker, author of Confessions of a Hacker. And today I'm going to talk about all of the different cyber attacks and cyber crimes that I've witnessed directly over the last 18 plus years and how to protect yourselves from having these nefarious and damaging attacks happen to you.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owners Association, where real estate investors have found success since 1968. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group. This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com. Hello and welcome to episode 501. Did you know that a cyber attack occurs every 40 seconds in the United States? Wire fraud, ransomware, and phishing attacks are also happening to real estate investors, and most don't know that they've been targeted until the money is gone. Jeremiah Baker is an ethical hacker who spent 17 years breaking into systems before the bad guys do. His work has inspired TV shows like Homeland and Burn Notice. He's on the advisory board at Stanford, and he's been called in after six-figure wire transfers vanished without a trace. Jeremiah is here to walk us through the real-world scams hitting investors today and what you need to do right now to avoid becoming the next victim. Jeremiah, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Tell our listeners a little bit about your background. I know there's some real estate in your background, and I'd love to hear about that, and then how you kind of transitioned into cybersecurity.
As we were speaking before you hit the wonderful record button, I feel blessed. I have a very unique upbringing in that I as well kind of got my entrepreneurial start in real estate. My mother was the oldest of 11 children, and my father was the youngest of 7, and neither graduated from high school for various reasons. My mother, of course, was taking care of her 11 siblings, and they didn't grow up with a lot of financial means. So she was, since a child, raising children. And then my father dropped out in the 10th grade due to some learning issues with reading and so forth. And they ended up deciding to foster 56 foster children in our home over the years because they didn't think they could have children. I came along many, many years later after I'd already had adopted siblings and my 2 older sisters, and pretty much anyone that's ever been in the Baker family is always a Baker. So we have this big, giant extended family as my parents. My mother would always say, my late mother would say, once a Baker, always a Baker. But with 56 children, you can imagine they needed more financial means to raise kids. So what they decided to do was become entrepreneurs. They didn't really have any other option. They had no education, really, not even graduating from high school nor going to college. So they went into multifamily rental property restoration, and they bought an old hotel in upstate New York along a rail side. There used to be a hotel, like a tavern and so forth. It had been vacant for a very long period of time. They bought it, converted it into an 8-unit apartment building in the early 1980s. My mother had later gone to cosmetology school, so she opened a hair salon in the first floor, kind of a mixed-use concept before it became super popular as it is today. And they brought me with them. I was about 5 years old. And I just loved it. I loved every aspect of taking something and turning it into something better. The rental aspect of having full occupancy at all times at the apartment buildings, and then seeing folks coming in and out of the hair salon, and just the activity of how that happens. People coming, leaving, laughter, telling stories, and so forth. And then that, of course, my parents said, you need to be the first to go to college. So I did that. I really wanted to. I thought there has to be something better than chasing rent and, chasing money all the time from the real estate side of things. And then I got to school and I realized pretty quickly that I actually like the entrepreneurship stuff better. So I did end up graduating, but I started a business my second year in college, and it was during the .com boom. So we built the first National Soccer Hall of Fame website from our dorm room. We did a lot of work for some of the bigger companies like Pfizer and Hartford Insurance with some advertising campaigns and things like that, all online stuff, and just building websites, doing advertisement. And that really kicked me off into the world of entrepreneurship and technology which then led me into the corporate world where I got my first taste of cybersecurity. And that was implementing a CRM system long before the big giant that we know of called Salesforce.com existed. I was doing a project in Silicon Valley in the late 1990s. And we were talking about how things were going to move from being all hosted internally to being able to access on the web, just like this call that we're having today. And I was speaking on the topic of how we're moving to the web at that time. And that led me into further down the path of cybersecurity in 2006 when I started another business helping, which is the business today, helping companies to grow. And in that process, one of my first companies was a cybersecurity company, the ethical hacking business, being hired to hack into banks, casinos, hospitals, government organizations, and so forth before the bad guys do it, so that people and organizations can find their weaknesses and then harden their defenses before the bad guys attack them. So that's really a very condensed version of what brought me to where I am today and helping folks understand their threats.
Give us a little history. Like what back in the beginning, what kind of cybersecurity threats were you looking at in the early days of the internet? And then we'll kind of talk about, well, what are we looking at now, which I'm sure is a little bit different.
A lot of the concerns were similar, but they were less prevalent. So people were always concerned. So for example, imagine you're in with a big Fortune 50 or Fortune 100, which I was at a Fortune 50 on my first project, a giant company. And they were basically implementing going from very archaic systems, legacy systems, as we called them back in those days, where they would host massive data centers and computers inside their organization, inside their data centers, and then house all of their customer data, including, pricing, sales data, contact information, et cetera, supply chain, everything. And the idea was they wanted to host everything on site because they felt they had better control over it. And it was less likely that someone from the outside would be getting in as if, you were versus accessing through a browser, like we do with most of our things today. So the concern was, will we be safe enough to be able to move to the cost effectiveness and efficiencies of going to what we consider web-based or browser-based versus hosting all of our information and data internally? And that was really the initial conversation. Then there was also technology concerns back then. I mean, most people didn't have high-speed internet at home. So it would have been, there really wasn't this giant need to be accessing this kind of data, from an outside of the office perspective. And if, as you remember, back then, everyone went to the office. So it kind of made sense. But we noticed that high-speed internet was starting to become more available outside of, the corporate connections. We could have it in our homes with DSL and high-speed cable connections and things like that. So it was really around the same things that we have today, which is we don't want someone from the outside getting access to this data because it's our most valuable asset. And all the conversations were around that. And we were doing a lot less financial transactions back then. So it was more along the lines of, we don't want someone getting our contacts and customer data and transaction information and inside secrets and things of that nature.
In the early days, what kind of cybersecurity was actually happening? Like what were some of the cases or examples that you saw back in 2006?
Going to 2006, that's fast forwarding a little bit. The work that I was just speaking of was late 90s, early 2000s, right?
What were we seeing in the late 90s, early 2000s then?
Not a whole lot. It was a lot of social engineering, trickery, people getting in physically into facilities to try to access things that they shouldn't.
So they'd actually have to sneak into the building to gain access to the data.
It was more prevalent, yeah. But they didn't have to do that. It's just that we were a lot less connected back then.
Jump ahead to 2006, and that's around when you started your company?
It is, yep.
Give us some examples of what kind of problems your clients were having and what they were hiring you to do.
The hiring was always very, very focused. Clients came to us to essentially have us hack them before the bad guys do it. So and sometimes they'd want to do this just out of their own goodwill, curiosity, better security. But then there are other requirements like compliance in certain industries, like PCI compliance, which is if you're accepting credit card transactions and things like that, there's a requirement, payment card industry compliance standards, which required part of what we do to be part of the whole compliance package, amongst many other things that they would have to have done. So there's PCI compliance, there's HIPAA compliance, like with the healthcare industry, and this ethical hacking or pen testing was part of that, meeting that compliance. There's SOC 2 compliance, where if you're building software or something like this, you need to comply with those standards and so forth. So it was a combination of trying to meet compliance standards. And then there were those folks, which we appreciated at times, maybe even more, which were those that genuinely cared about the overall health of their security. And what we noticed back then, which was really troublesome, and it bothered me a lot until a major shift happened, which was a lot of folks just wanted the check mark so they could satisfy their compliance and then move on. But the check mark didn't necessarily mean good security. And what we were up against in our particular line of work is, can't you just do this very low cost kind of scan-based thing and give us flying colors? And we said, no, we don't want to do that because, one, selfishly, if we do that and you get compromised, it comes back on us and it looks like we did subpar work. So we don't want to do that. So we were foregoing a lot of business in the early days because of that. But then when folks would come and say, no, we don't want that. We want real, genuine quality service because we want to know where we stand against a live attack and make sure that we're not a sitting duck, to these breaches and things like that we read about today. So what happened essentially, fast forward a few years, and there's a major not realtor, but it was a department store, I guess you could call it. I won't name names, but it's all public information. You can Google it. Rhymes with Target, was compromised, and they were in the news saying that, hey, I don't understand how this happened. We were just certified as PCI compliant, yet we still were breached. And all this credit card information was being siphoned out from where you swipe the card at the point of sale. And once that happened, there was a massive shift in the cybersecurity market where people started to take things more seriously. And at that time, the CEO was let go as part of their response to being breached. And then the C-suite, CEO, CTO, CIO, and so forth, started to get nervous. Like, what do we need to do to make sure that this doesn't happen to us nor our organization? And that 2014, give or take, is when there was a big shift in the market where people started to say, and major organizations started to say, what do we need to do versus, just give us a simple check in the box. And that was a giant shift in the market.
Skip ahead to today. And what kind of breaches are you seeing? Like where is cybersecurity important to corporations and then on the individual level as well?
What we're seeing today, full transparency, is the same old, but more advanced. So, and I'll take one step back. So in this line of work, we worked with almost every major casino, bank, hospital, manufacturing firm around the globe, and almost always got in with enough time. So we never really met something that we couldn't hack, right? And a lot of folks in the world think that that's what cybersecurity is. It's this mission impossible, kind of like super high-tech stuff. But the problem that I had personally, being owner of the company and fielding what we'll call incidents when something happens, taking those phone calls. So notice the theme over the last 18 years, and that is, great, there's all this high-tech stuff, hands on keyboard, you know all the images, the guy in the hoodie and dark room and hacking in and all this kind of stuff. That's very small percentage of what's actually happening in the real world, where real dollars, real disruption, real money is being lost, reputation, companies going out of business. What I noticed is there's the line of work of being protective and doing very advanced work, but the majority of loss and everything were coming from a very small subset of things. And that is something we'll call a business account takeover, like your email gets compromised, which then leads to fund transfer fraud, wire fraud, any of the quick payment apps that you can think of, and so forth. And then the third, ransomware and scams. And it really, that's 80% of all of the attacks and loss that we're seeing. And then that also was reading an article from a cyber insurance firm that, provides remedy in terms of financial aid when a breach or when something happens, a compromise happens. And they kind of mirrored the same thing in a recent article that I read, that they said that that's exactly where 80% of their claims are coming from. It's from an account takeover that then leads to fund transfer fraud. and then also in the last bits would be ransomware and, scams. So it's not as much the super high tech, breaking in science fiction, Mission Impossible kind of stuff. It's traditional scams. People are tricking us into doing things so that they can get our money. There's some form of wire transfer, fund transfer. They want to then maybe other examples would be they take over an account and maybe they're not doing a wire fraud case, but what they're doing is sending emails out as if it's coming from you or I to our list saying, hey, I have this great crypto investment thing that I found. And they're trying to rely on the fact that we have trust with our colleagues and our clients. And maybe someone will click the link and, put some money in, and they're siphoning money and funds from our contacts. So these are the most prevalent type things. And then there's ransomware where, all of our systems get locked down after someone in an organization clicks on a link, which then leads to the scam side of things, which is extortion. They're saying, hey, we have you locked down. If you don't pay us a certain amount of money, then we're going to either release all of your data or whatever it may be, or we're just going to keep you locked down so that your business can't function and you potentially can go out of business. And one of the stats that we see all the time is that 60% or so of small businesses or businesses go out of business after one of those major kind of breaches. So it's really, the unfortunate thing is the world would like us to think it's the person in the hoodie hacking in, but that's the hard stuff to do. They're doing more of the easy stuff, which is it's not as much as a cyber technology issue as it is a human psychology issue, and that we're being tricked.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com.
If you're thinking of leaving your W-2 job and becoming a full-time real estate investor, one of the greatest costs you must consider is healthcare for you and your family. When I made this transition myself, I found the whole healthcare insurance process to be confusing and frustrating. That's why I'm glad I met Chad Creasy at RCB and Associates. Chad is a professional health insurance agent who helps real estate investors and small business owners understand and choose their best healthcare options. And best of all, his services are covered by the insurance company and won't cost you a dime. If you live in Michigan and are expecting a change in your healthcare insurance coverage for any reason, or losing employer coverage or transitioning into Medicare, then you owe it to yourself to contact Chad Creasy at rcbassociatesllc.com. Give us an example of that, like from experience. Give us an example of that human breach that you just met.
I'll keep this anonymized to protect, the innocent and the guilty as much as possible. This was not too long ago. I was actually in my kitchen cleaning up after dinner one evening, and I received a phone call from a friend of mine. I could see on the iPhone the caller ID. So I answered excitedly, "Hey, how you doing?" And I'll just call him Bob. "Hey, Bob." And he said, "Jeremiah, I'm not doing good at all." And I said, "What happened?" And he said, "Someone just took $740,000 from our business." So of course I'm like, oh, the hairs go up, another one of these calls. So I walked down the hall to my office, which I'm in now. And I said, please tell me what happened. And the order of events go as such, where someone had gotten into the VP of Sales email account. They just got their username and password. Later, after doing diagnostics and some forensics work, we quickly realized that they did not have something called multi-factor authentication on their email account, which is essentially you put in your username, you put your password, you hit login, and then you get a code on your phone, a timeout code on an app, preferably versus SMS or text message. And then you have to put that code in order to complete the login. A lot of people complain and say it's cumbersome, but on the flip side, if a bad guy gets your username and password, do you want them easily to be able to just log in? I think not, especially in this story that I'm sharing here. So there was no multi-factor authentication on the account. The bad guy sat inside the account watching dialogue going between the VP of sales and potential customers. And this is a private aviation company, so there's a lot of money at stake, very large purchases happening. So basically, it went like this, where that person sat in there, they were watching, and they saw a customer getting ready to make their initial deposit, which was the 700 and some $1,000. They were hiding all these emails from the actual VP of sales by setting up rules and kind of staying under the water. So the VP didn't know any of this was going on. Then what they did a few months in is when the order was getting very, very close, they requested to the potential client, the customer, future customer, why don't you wire your money here? And it looked very professional, letterhead and everything. The customer sent the money, but then a few days went by and they didn't hear anything about like, what are the next steps with the aviation company? So they called in, said, hey, we ordered, what are our next steps? How do we progress? And they said, we never took any money from you. What do you mean you ordered? And that is one of the cases of where it was very simple. Bad person either guessed on the dark web, found usernames, password. It's not hard to do. People reuse passwords as well across all these accounts. So it showed up over here. You're probably using it over here, which you should not do. That's why we're told not to do that. They logged in, and then they were able just to redirect the wire. And then, to the best of my knowledge, the wire went, and this is usually how it happens, to an account here in America, if the businesses are in America, and then they immediately bounce out to another country where we don't have jurisdiction or the ability to claw that money back. And that was a very simple attack. It wasn't super complicated. They just needed to get in and log in and then use some social engineering, scam, and trick the person into sending the money to a place where they should not have, which was not, they didn't, it wasn't a real transaction with who they thought they were dealing with.
That could happen to real estate investors too. I mean, anyone who's raising money from investors or buying properties or selling properties, the same scenario could happen. So what are the points? Like you mentioned, multi-factor authentication. How else would we as investors and people who transfer money all the time protect ourselves every step of the way to not only make sure that doesn't happen, but to double and triple check to make sure that it's not actually happening and we don't know about it?
Really, the best things that we can do, kind of taking one step, is just understanding and accepting that any business where it's the nature of that business to do a lot of these kind of exchanges, the bad guys know this, and they will target these types of organizations. Anyone that's doing high frequency transactions, because they want to take advantage of the fact that that's where the money's moving, and they likely can get in and trip somebody up where they don't verify, they don't have multi-factor authentication in place and something like that to get the money, because they just want the money. That's their main priority. So the first thing is just accepting that it does happen. Don't put our head in the sand and think that it won't happen to you. That over the last, almost 20 years, that's the biggest problem that I see, is people almost have this reverse paranoia where they kind of want to hide from it. Accept that it's there, step one. Two, understand how it's happening, like in that particular scenario, which is a very common one. Make sure that all of your accounts, and it's mandated from the top down within an organization, within the company, that things like multi-factor authentication are mandatory and turned on across all accounts, so that even if someone does get your username and password for your email account, they can't log in unless they have this MFA, multi-factor authentication code. That's a big one, because then it'll create a big hurdle for the attacker. And this is fortunate and unfortunate, but what will happen is they'll just move on to another target that doesn't, another potential victim that doesn't have this turned on or have these things in place. Now, secondarily, we want to do verification. If you can't afford to lose it, this is what we have written on our wall, or you're not willing to accept the loss, verify. So before wiring that money or asking a client to set up a separate channel outside of email, phone, text, whatever you're normally using, usually email and things like this, to have them verify through a second channel. And, sometimes we're very lucky where you can walk down the hall or you can call from a different number or whatever it may be, just to make sure that, did you truly intend this to be sent? Is this what you really want us to do? And just make sure that you're dealing with the right person, because a lot of times what happens is there is zero verification. It's just something that they're used to doing. They send, let's say, 5, 10, 20 wires a day or a week or whatever, and it's just part of their standard operating procedure, and they just send it out.
Anytime I send a wire, I always call the bank and verify. I call the person who I'm wiring to. and verify. But even then, you never know. I mean, are you calling the right number? Are you being spoofed on that as well?
Yeah, and that's why it's just good to be, it's unfortunate, but it's good to be a little paranoid because there is no 100% foolproof way in my experience. But layering in these things like verification, multi-factor authentication, using separate command communication channels outside of whatever you're in and reaching out to the person, it will help prevent that from happening. And there are a few cases where some clients got really lucky. Like, for example, someone called posing to be their bank. I was getting ready to fly to speak at a cyber conference in Texas a few months ago. And just as I was getting ready to get in line to get on the airplane, I received a phone call from a colleague in New York City. And she said that, I think I almost got hacked. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, I received a phone call that said it was my bank. They had all my information, so I believed them. And then they proceeded to tell me that $15,000 or some similar dollar amount had been sent through one of the fund transfer apps into my account incorrectly. And they needed to get my login information so that they could then take that money back out of my account and then everything would be okay. She was busy doing a bunch of things, and they were using urgency. You need to hurry up. You need to do this. And that's a huge red flag. Anytime someone calls, says they're your bank asking for personal information like login and all that, they'll never do that. So that's number one. Number two, if there's urgency, you need to hurry up because blank. Don't believe them. Like, urgency is the tool they're using to trick us. And then the last bit, they did ask her for her information and she gave it, but there was like some chatter in the line and they got one of the characters wrong on her password. And they said, we tried it and it didn't work. And something raised a red flag in her mind where she said, I need to hang up quickly. And then that's when she had called me. And I said, I think you just got super, super lucky, but drive down to your bank physically and sit down with the team and just make sure, relay to them what happened and make sure that, you're okay within that particular bank. And then in this case, she was part of a targeted organized attack because she started to receive calls from a different bank that she had an account with, and they tried to do the same thing there. So they were targeting some pool of people and going after it like that. But she was very, very fortunate that they didn't get the information when they were asking for it over the phone. And then since then, I'll receive updated calls from her, that these things continue to happen. It was a little bit of a persistent threat situation, but it has since stopped. And now she is super vigilant on verify, and have all the cybersecurity basics in place, like MFA and so forth.
What groups or countries are typically behind these types of organized attacks?
It's really the folks that where we have no jurisdiction. So what we've seen, and anyone can Google this as well, it always kind of teeters, between the China, North Korea, Russia, that kind of situation. But it's not limited to that. Like, we just saw a report where a U.S. college student was using these techniques to essentially compromise companies, hold them hostage, saying, I have tons of your data, client data, so forth. And if you don't pay me in Bitcoin, I'm going to release it. And the first one said no. He'd asked for like $75 million or something and then lowered it down to like 25 million. They still said no. And then he went on to another victim, another organization, and then basically got them to pay some amount of money. And the way that I believe the feds caught him was because he was using his own cryptocurrency account to go buy like designer shoes and clothes and things like that. So he was effective on that end, but he wasn't very smart on the other side. And they caught him because that's all blockchain and they could verify who was doing what. And that was inside, that was inside our country. And initially it used to be giant organized rings from my own experience. I can't speak for the entirety, but now it's just a combination of people trying to extort money where they can and get us to click on things we shouldn't, and get people to either wire you money or spend money in places that they should not do.
How do we protect ourselves then? I mean, one of the part A of that question is, passwords. What's the best practices for passwords? And then what else is there to protect ourselves?
It is true. The magic really is in the basics. And the way I like to look at it is layering. So you have many walls of defense in place, and you're just making it so difficult for the bad guys, understanding that they're lazy, they don't want to get caught, And all they want to do is be effective. If they're going after money or whatever it is, they just want to get that and then not get caught. So really the basics. So a lot of it is, it's weird that we're still using passwords in this day and age because, again, it's so easy if anyone gets the password that they can log in. So really, we still have to change them. We have to make very difficult passwords, even though they're easier to crack using tools and machines to kind of guess our passwords if someone really wants to do that. But it's still best practice to frequently change. Do not reuse passwords across accounts. So if you got a banking account and a Gmail account over here, don't rinse and repeat the same passwords. Change them. Use very strong, high character, high length passwords. Make sure that you have multi-factor authentication or two-step verification, it's called. And it's preferably done through an app, and like Google and Microsoft. And there's other companies like Okta and different identity management platforms that will do that at the enterprise. And that's where you get the code that has an expiration on it via an app versus a text message. Text message is better than nothing if you use that as your method for getting the code. But from what I'm reading and what I'm seeing, a lot of the times it's not the actual company that's providing that texting service. It's a third party, and we don't really know how secure that third party is. And someone could intercept the code if they were targeting you.
So you like authenticator apps then?
Currently, yes. And it's always changing. So there's that with the password hygiene, multi-factor authentication. Verify everything, and then really just understand. A good exercise to do, and we call them secure days, is where you understand, here's how the attacks are happening through these story formats, like real world use cases. And then how could you not have that happen to you? So reverse engineer that and put the measures in place and then mandate it across your organization. Because a lot of times what's happening is it's just simple. Like we'll be in talking to a CEO and he's like, yeah, my whole company has to use MFA, but I'm not going to do it. I don't want to enter that code every time. Like, oh, all it takes is one link in the chain, especially at the top where you're the most high profile person. And then we see these from the CEO scams all the time, where it's like an email that looks like it's coming to an executive or someone in the organization that's below the executive, the CEO. And they'll say things like, hey, hurry up, I'm at a lunch with somebody. Can you go get gift cards and for $2,000, get the code off the back and send it to me, and I'll reimburse you once I get back to the office. But I'm in a hurry and I forgot to give the gift to this particular client or whatever the setup is that they're using. And I personally experienced these with our clients. And that's why it's so important from the top down, as I'd mentioned earlier, that it goes across the entire organization that we have these things in place. And then on top of that, there are basics that we can do, like when it comes to ransomware or being held hostage and things like that. That's just have your data backup, have it encrypted, have it segmented from the internet. Go through regular restoration exercises so that if you do get hit with one of these things, your team can stand you back up and get your business running in a shorter period of time than being stuck in the mud and losing money every second that goes by, and or reputation and so forth. But it is really in those basics. And then, of course, the IT teams and the technology teams will have all the things like identifying phishing emails before they hit your inbox to kind of limit those problems, firewalls, intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, and then data exfiltration tools and all the core security set that is in place. But again, as we talked about earlier, a lot of this doesn't even have a whole lot to do with those tools as it does with the tool that, that's here. They're trying to trick us into being lazy and or overlooking certain things so that they can compromise us or steal from us.
What's the most creative fraud that you've seen so far?
The more creative work's been in the work that we've done. So it's kind of come into like tricking people into doing things, even the people that have hired us. But honestly, that was just because we had time and we were being paid to do it. And we put the highest level social engineers on the project of tricking people into thinking they were talking to somebody they weren't talking to and getting invited to things and, using human nature. But in reality, the most of these are just somebody getting, and I'm looking through my list here. If you see me looking off the screen, I have a ton of stories. And like, there's one $800,000 recently that was taken, and that was someone that got to a CPA where the multi-factor wasn't necessarily in place. And a person set up a whole, well, this is kind of creative. They set up a whole clone version of the business in the same city. Similar name, made the URL look very close, except one URL was off. So if people started to verify, it kind of looked like it was who they thought it was going to. And it was a regular wire transaction that would happen between the two parties. and someone got in there, a bad actor got in there and basically funneled the money, 800 and some $1,000 to their like recently set up bank account and business, because the people looked and they're like, yeah, that's who we deal with every day. Like, we send this one, I think it was a weekly transfer that happened, and they sent it off, and then quickly the actual recipient said, I haven't received it yet. Where is it? And when they looked into it, they're like, oh no, I think we sent this to a cloned version of the business that wasn't you, but it looked a lot like you. So that's one of the ones that's more clever, but a lot of times it's just taking over someone's email account and asking someone to send money to a different set of wire information than where they thought they would. But they can get clever with those spoofing things. And then there is one that's a little crazy. This is new with AI. A CTO friend of mine, and again, I'm just looking at a bulleted list of stories here that I hope will be helpful. A friend of mine's a CTO, pretty big company, chief technology officer. He went to visit his mother, and he had his son with him, and they were just talking and sitting on the couch. Mother received a phone call. The phone call was the voice of her grandson saying, I'm stuck in South America. Can you please Venmo me or some transfer $15,000 or they won't let me out of this jail. Luckily, grandmother was able to turn to her left and say, but you're sitting right here. What is this? And then even luckier, or equally lucky, was my friend is a very strong technology person. And he said, I think they cloned my son's voice, which can do, it takes like 6 seconds of video or whatever to clone her voice. And then they put in a script and used it to rely on all those things: urgency, fear of loss. It's a relative, grandmother to grandson. And luckily that didn't happen in that particular case because grandson was sitting, right next to his grandmother. But imagine if he wasn't, and maybe they saw that he was actually on a trip to South America or something like that, where the context was even stronger. She could have fell prey to that. And we've even seen it on the video calls for like real estate transactions and things like that. And then the AI version, let's say, of me started to glitch, and the company said something's wrong, and they closed the account, and it was someone trying to pull some kind of scam in a real estate transaction doing the same thing.
So you can clone both voice and video image now.
It's crazy. It is. That's again why this verifying, and now there's tools to say AI or not, and it's same tricks, more advanced technology that's better at executing on them.
It doesn't hurt to be triple paranoid. I got an email from one of my investors the other day, and his bank account, in his email, he said, well, my bank account was hacked, so I'm changing my account information, and it was distribution time. So can you make the distribution to my new account? And the email was from him. Everything looked right, but I still thought, okay, I need to verify before we go and do this. I need to verify that this is really him. So I texted him at his cell phone number and just said, I want to make sure that's you. And he assured me it was, but at the same time, I feel like that should just be second nature, is to double check.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really good that you did that, because, and again, just speaking from my experience where things went wrong, verification rarely ever happened.
Jeremiah, tell our listeners how they can find out more about you, maybe use the services of your company. How would you like them to find you?
One, in terms of verification, I love to just connect with people on LinkedIn. Reach out to me there, Jeremiah Baker. It has a great chat tool. If you have questions, get to know each other, those kind of things. But I just like to help people. And like I said at the beginning of the call, I've just seen so many bad things happen to good people. And the reality is, unless you know how these are happening, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to protect against them, because a lot of times we find out after it happens to us. So I spend most of my time talking to great folks like you and to your audiences. I'm getting ready to fly out of state over the weekend to speak at an in-person conference to give a keynote on these topics, where I share tons and tons of stories and then how to prevent these things from happening to the audience. And I just like to educate and then also be helpful to people as much as I can when it comes to cybersecurity. And LinkedIn has been a really great tool for that. So reach out anytime. I'm here. I'm happy to help.
And what's your favorite hack or app?
It's funny, like we say, the the least usage of this thing is the actual phone, right? But it's the app. Favorite app, I would say it has to be email, just because I use email so much. I honestly don't use that other than voice and email, really, and the camera. So there's that from the app perspective. And the greatest hack is maybe not as much of a hack, but it's just really being vigilant and not putting head in the sand, and really understanding that we are all a target to this cybersecurity stuff. And the only way to stay safe is to be aware of it and to accept it, and then apply the basics all the time and stay very, very up to date on the current attacks that are happening and how they're happening, versus waiting to be surprised like a jack-in-the-box trick by one happening to you.
Jeremiah, thanks for coming on the show today and talking about cybersecurity, the breaches that you've seen and helped your clients with, and just how we can protect ourselves as real estate investors who are always transacting money in one way or another. So thank you so much for being on the show today. It was very enlightening.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it.
I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's higinvestor.com. And you can also ask questions and join us on Facebook by going to RPOA, Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast. This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.